Hey, everybody. I've been having an interesting discussion on Facebook. It's on Black Belt Magazine Online's Facebook page, right? And it's really difficult having this discussion because I came to realize that I'm guessing these people read Black Belt Magazine. I'm guessing they went online, looked at archives, and they saw the magazine when it was in print. But I can't vouch for that. But I have to assume that, right? And Black Belt Magazine asked the question, is boxing a martial art? And, people said yes, people said no. Right, I'm going to weigh in right now. No, boxing is not a martial art. It is a martial sport. It's a martial activity. It's what's more properly called a combat sport. Um, Already I can hear the detractors, and because I don't physically have enough time left in life to look at all the hate mail I'm going to get, I'm going to, pretty much kill comments on this video because I don't have the time. All right. And this is mostly for those of you who don't know what I'm saying, because those of you who may have been in the military and carried the gear around and done some military training are instantly going to get this. Those of you who are really into weaponry are instantly going to get this. Most of you are not. To be honest with you, most martial arts, the way they're practiced today, are not really practiced as martial arts. They're practiced as sort of fun activities, or more often just sport. But I heard several comments like, it's the basis of all military combat training. No, boxing, Western boxing, absolutely, positively not. It's obviously useful on the battlefield. No. Okay, let's break this down, and I'll go on to a couple other things that were said, and just I have to get this out. This may save your life if you understand this, right? First of all, boxing was always invented as a sport. It was never primarily a military combat thing. It can't be. Let me show you something. See this? Okay, this is a blade. Folks, this is a blade, right? That's the basis of most martial art. Most martial art, martial meaning Mars, art of war, or if you use terms like Wushu, stopping a spear, or Budo, the way of the warrior, okay, all has to do with warfare. These arts were originally intended for warfare, and most of your empty-handed stuff, especially the empty-handed boxing, whether it's Chinese boxing, Korean martial arts, or Greek boxing, or Sumerian boxing, was intended either as a backup to your weapon skill and was often integrated with the weapon skills, or it was intended as a means of fitness training to keep fit when you didn't have the weapons, and as a way for the soldiers to practice being aggressive with each other without necessarily murdering each other, injuring each other, right? So that's very important. Okay, one guy said, well, boxing, unlike many martial arts, you can pressure test it and it's passed. Again, folks, if I pressure test boxing against this knife, it fails 100% of the time. All right? Take 100 people armed with knives, trained for 3 months, take 100 people trained a year in boxing, and pit the two together. The guys with the knives, I mean, I'd be surprised if any one of them lost. Okay? And most martial arts, the way that they were taught, when they were relevant on the battlefield, you had a primary weapon and a secondary weapon. So, for example, we like to think of swords as like the main weapon of the knights and the samurai. Those were all backup weapons. Usually it was a bow, a projectile weapon. In Asia and Europe, knights, the upper class warriors didn't really use projectiles as much, but it was usually a spear. Most warriors in most cultures carried a spear, whether they were peasants or nobility. The armored ones, they had more. The higher up in status, the more money you had, the more armor you had. You had shields, you had helmets, you could have multiple layers of armor. There was always a backup weapon, a sword or a dagger, depending on how much money you had, which depended on the social class you belonged to. If you were a peasant, you might go out there with a flail or just a large stick, right? Or maybe an axe, and then you might have some kind of dagger tucked in with you, and almost everybody carried some kind of knife back then because that's what you ate with. There weren't a lot of forks and spoons. You ate with your hands and a knife, right? So if you were doing combat, you always had to contend with projectiles. You closed with the enemy. You had long weapons or mid-range weapons, depending on how well equipped the enemy was and you were. And then when you closed into close range, say the weapon broke or got knocked aside, you drew your short weapon and you closed in, and there was always some kind of grabbing and some kind of kicking and you didn't have ground and pound. You had ground and stab, ground and smash. Maybe you took someone down and you bashed him with a mace and you were done. If you if you got down and did a full mount on someone to try and stab them, you usually wouldn't do that on a battlefield because, well, someone would come by and shank you. All right? So you've got to understand that that's where martial art comes from. Most people, I think, when they say martial art, they picture a sporting event or social violence, low-grade social violence, because there's high-grade social violence. There's a couple videos on the internet of champion MMA players who got into a fight, and one guy threw a punch, and next thing you know, someone comes up behind him with a 2x4, whacks him in his skull, and he's in a coma for the rest of his life. Right? There's different levels of violence. Most martial arts today are activities and sports. And God bless it. It's fun. It's great. I teach at Zinni's gym. I teach the sport of it. I don't teach the people how to use knives and how to gouge each other's eyes and everything. We're mostly doing some boxing, some kickboxing, a few self-defense things. It's a lot of parents bringing their kids and exercising along them. So I've got someone in their 30s or 40s and someone in their early teens, right? And so I have to adjust. But if I was to teach an 11-year-old how to survive in the world, the first thing I would teach her is how to use a knife and how to have a warrior's attitude. Boxing is incredibly useful for martial artists, especially the part where you learn to deal with contact and pain and all these things. But I want you to consider this. Again, I have to do this because some of you don't get this point. Okay. Give two people these, or two clubs, two nightsticks, and give them 15 3-minute rounds. Can you conceive of any situation where two people that are determined to hurt each other with weapons such as knives and sticks are going to last 15 rounds? And as far as military training goes, let's expose some truth here. It is impossible to survive in any unarmed context with a military against the military force, even if you take away the weapons. Let's think about this for a second. Most militaries that can afford it equip their soldiers with a helmet, at the very least. Okay? Most militaries issue flak jackets or body armor, which we would have. Sometimes we would carry flak jackets in both the Marines and the National Guard, and the Kevlar helmet. Imagine punching a Kevlar helmet. You're going to break your hand. You're going to accomplish nothing to hurt yourself. You kick someone in a Kevlar helmet with a combat boot or a jungle boot. Okay, your foot might survive, but you're still doing nothing, right? Then, on top of that, a Kevlar flak vest, you punch it, and it absorbs the force of your blows. Most of your punches, kicks, your knife hands, your palm strikes, they're next to useless. They're not completely useless. Some knees and elbows and some kicks might buffet the person and knock them down, right? But you're greatly reduced. Now, we would sometimes do CQB and things like that with a Kevlar vest with a Kevlar trauma plate in there. And believe me, you're going to break your hand on those. We did an experiment once because someone said, hey, Lance Corporal Uchkin, you're pretty good at kicking. And we had this big burly guy from Texas or something. He put on the trauma plate. He had the Kevlar vest and the trauma plate. And I, set up and I did a full skip sidekick, but it was more like a jump skipping sidekick. And I had combat boots on. And I blasted him in the chest. I lifted this guy up into the air, knocked him on his butt. He stood right up and said, well, that was certainly a good kick. Okay? I mean, again, now say you grapple with someone, right? You've got all this gear on your body, right? So you're grappling with this person. You do have things to hold on to, but they have things to hold on to. It's not like wearing a gi, and it's not like no gi, right? And so when you're grappling with this person, for instance, if they butt you with their helmet, they can knock you unconscious, break your nose instantly, rip your face open, and cause a cut right away. It's not the same, right? And then there's the danger of having your eyes gouged out. Someone's going to go in and hook that eye and start tearing it. They can tear the flesh of your mouth. They can crush your Adam's apple. They can grab your groin and crush it, right? But all military soldiers are either issued a bayonet or a utility knife. All of them. We all, for instance, in the Marines, we all went into the field with a K-bar fighting knife. So you have a K-bar, right? And then some infantry troops are issued bayonets, right? Which is a long dagger. So now the weapon itself that you have, a pistol, you can pistol whip someone. If you have a long weapon, like a rifle or shotgun, you can bash someone's brains in with the butt of it. And even if you bash them with the front of it, that's pretty strong. You can take out the person's eye, rip his face open. You can cuss them. A jab with a. We had an M16A2 when I was in. Imagine being jabbed in between the eyes. That's damn near a lethal blow, right? You could hit someone's mouth, break the teeth, and barrel goes halfway into the person's mouth. Okay, so you've got to worry about blunt trauma, stabbings. So basically, hand-to-hand combat in a military or a combat situation is, you could think of it as weapon-assisted grappling. I think of it as grappling-assisted weaponing. All right? So this idea that boxing is like some ideal martial art, or that it's a complete martial art, it is simply untrue. It is a fantastic training method, particularly psychologically. But you don't need to do a lot of it. Like, if someone gets in there and boxes with another person of fairly equal skill, right? And they blast at each other for one round, and you do it like 2 or 3 times in your life as you're training military stuff. You have now been desensitized to violence. You can have the presence of mind that when someone is actually hitting you or something, you won't panic. You'll be able to continue, right? You don't need a ton of training in boxing to get the mental benefits of it for the military, because the bulk of your martial instruction should be on how to get your weapons deployed, how to deal with weapons, how to try to parry a stab coming at you instead of doing this and getting cut in these vulnerable soft parts of your hands, turning it here and then quickly turning it into a grab, 2 hands on the weapon, deploying headbutts, deploying elbows, eye gouges, all buying time to get your knife out. I mean, to be honest with you, if an ideal military martial art should be comprised of elements mostly that you find in some of the more complete Filipino martial arts and some of the old Japanese jiu-jitsu systems, with upgrades from other things that are around. Obviously, I think this idea the Army has of basing most of their combatives, especially the early stages, on Gracie jiu-jitsu, is well-intentioned, but kind of a bad idea, for force on force training. But it's what they got. I think the Marine Corps martial arts program appears to be fairly complete, and from what I've seen, they've got a very thorough regimen as you go up through the ranks. It's probably a good template. Some of the old World War I and II combatives with upgrades would be fantastic. You have to bear in mind that you have to consider that at least the person using the martial art will have gear on, which will encumber their movement, weigh them down, right? And that the people that they're attacking may be armed and armored similarly. I mean, even if you're up there in the hills of Afghanistan or in the desert in Iraq, the enemy troops, the insurgents, while they may not be heavily armed and protected, they may be. I mean, there's a lot of gear out there floating around, right? The U.S. has this weird habit of arming both sides of conflicts, and then every few years, as we get newer equipment, we sell the older equipment so we can make some money off of it, and it floats around long before our withdrawal from Afghanistan, there's all sorts of high-tech weaponry and trauma plates and stuff floating around. So they may very well have that high level of protection. And even a half-naked insurgent in a jungle somewhere, aside from their primary firearm, will probably have a knife and a machete or something. Life is very different. You don't square off and start jabbing and hooking and sparring with someone that has, perhaps a 2 foot long uh, bolo. Okay? I am not saying this to denigrate anyone that likes boxing. I like boxing. I teach boxing and kickboxing to the public, as well as to my private students. Okay? But I hear a lot of people say, well, if you don't believe boxing is an effective martial art, you go fight one. I'm like, I have. So when it's just me boxing against the boxer, I mean, these guys do it all the time. I'm getting creamed. I can hold my own with some, especially when I was younger. I still get in there and spar now. When I got to use my kicks and my knees and elbows, I did a lot better because I was throwing stuff at them that they weren't familiar, and none of them allowed me to leg kick them, and none of them wanted leg sweeps. If I start incorporating, I've worked with some boxers, and if I somehow trick them into agreeing to let me use any groundwork, any jujitsu, and I close in and I take them down, most of them are completely helpless, right? And I give thanks to the creator, however you may envision that creator, that I've never had to use my Filipino martial arts or other weapon skills against the person in the way that they were designed or intended, because that would mean that I had probably taken someone's life because I'm still here. Okay? Filipino martial arts, Indonesian martial arts, the weapons aspects of classical Chinese, Japanese, Korean martial arts are designed to take a life. That's it. That's what the weapons are for. There's a morality around it to where you don't want to take that life. Okay? You have a philosophy that teaches you to use things only as a last resort. And when we say last resort, we mean you may even try begging and pleading and all sorts of things to sort of de-escalate the combat. You're not looking to hurt anybody. I just want to make that clear because I think a lot of you that do boxing, kickboxing, especially the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA guys, you have a very distorted idea of what violence and you throw the terms combat around and the street around a lot, and I don't think any of you have been in combat or have trained in a profession that prepares you for combat where that's a possibility. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is just 1/5 of combat. You've got grappling, okay? You got punching, kicking. You got weapons that you can hold in your hand, and you got projectiles, guns. Those are all aspects of the street, not even let alone the military. In the military, you've got, and by the way, all 5 of these could be with multiple attackers. Civilian on quote unquote the street. All right. And if your training doesn't address that at some point, preferably repeatedly, that's a gap in your training and your knowledge. And lo and behold, most places don't address it. When I taught professionally more classical martial arts, I tried to address it, and both the clientele and the employer were like, "You got to back up off that. You're scaring people." Right? And I'm like, I know, but I feel a moral obligation to prepare them because they think they're prepared. And I think your MMA guys, you think that if you can, if when you're in peak condition, when you're young, relatively uninjured, after a 2-week to 2-month fight camp, fighting someone who's selected to be your equal in weight and capability, more or less, with a referee and rules in a controlled atmosphere, you think that because you can do that you understand combat, right? And that anything that doesn't work under that set of conditions is useless. I don't think I can say more. If you seriously listen to what I was saying, and then you listen to that last sentence, you should realize you don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. I'm just trying to save lives here. All right. Thank you so much. Y'all have a good day.